Goatees and a Whistle. I'm your host, Coach Huddy, and today I'm joined by my daughter, Kelly. She's here today to be a co-host, and I got a special guest, Liz Banks. She is a leadership and development program called Joy. I'm going to have her talk about that. Liz, thanks for coming on the show today. Let's kind of talk about who you are and what your organization is a little bit, and kind of how you got started.
Thanks, Chad. Thank you so much for having me. So I guess to back up, I have a background in education. So I was a middle school, Chad and I were talking, I was a middle school science teacher as well, but did a lot of different positions in the school system. I was also an athletic director, an assistant principal. I coached for over 20 years. I coached basketball and just kind of have always worked with our youth. And towards the end of my career, I found that I was a principal through COVID, which was not super fun, just like it wasn't for anybody. And what I found is that post-COVID, our kids were really struggling. I'm going to say especially our girls, but not only our girls. I have boys of my own, so it was not just a girl thing. But I had more and more girls that were showing up, like in my office. Just, I mean, they were having a hard time. They were anxious. They were nervous. They weren't things that we weren't seeing before. They had just amplified a lot. And I was kind of getting towards the end of my career. I was, 30 years in education, and I started looking for what was out there for these kids because they weren't to the level of needing therapy or counseling, but they needed something. And there was almost nothing out there. So that's when I left and I started my own business. Originally, I worked basically just one-on-one with girls that needed whatever they needed. I was just helping them be the best version of who they were and who they are. And it kind of morphed into, I started getting more and more really elite level athletes. And it surprised me because I thought I was going to be helping these kids that were just like struggling. And I ended up with like some of these, like I would say like that top 1%ers, the ones that were going on to play a D1 college sport, the ones that were getting into Ivy League schools and the U of M's of the world, and the ones who were valedictorian and prom queens and like all of it. Like these kids that you would look at and you'd think, wow, like they seem to have it all together. Well, they were these amazing women who just put a tremendous amount of pressure on themselves to be the best. And so that kind of morphed. I started doing more and more work with athletes. I do work with different sports teams, both at the high school and the college level, where I come in and I help them. Maybe it's develop their culture. Maybe it's look at what the strengths are of their athletes. And I mean, not technical strengths. I mean more like what they can bring to the program beyond their skills on the court or on the field, or like I worked with a golf team. So like it's varies, all different sports. And that's when I realized, wow, there's just this need, as you and I talked before, of how do we help our athletes? How do we help our youth be mentally tough through whatever circumstances they're in? And sports are a really obvious one because a lot of us participate in them, but they're just a building block to get us into wherever we're headed in life. In addition to that, I played sports. I coached sports. My oldest son played D1 basketball and is now training to be a professional athlete. My youngest was a D1 football recruit until an injury ended that. My husband played D1 soccer. My brother-in-law played pro hockey in the NHL. Like, so my family is all about sports. So I have seen it from probably every different angle. And I feel that it just gave me an insight as to some of the pieces that were maybe, I don't want to say missing, but needed to be enhanced.
Yeah, and that's great. And backing up, especially the COVID era, and Kelly can speak to this because that was her senior year, and it was that I can tell you just the mental aspect, and it was everybody obviously was impacted it, but like being as a parent and stuff like that, and seeing that your kid doesn't get a normal graduation. Her senior year, she played softball, and they went to state, took second in state, and they had everybody back. They were tuned up to ready to go and break another run. And they were crushing it. We got to play about 3 or 4 games, and we were just like, man, we're going to go back. And then COVID hit, and then like everything just stopped. And it was just like, holy crap. And then, you go through that. And as a parent, you're going through this. And obviously, parents felt it, but as a teacher on top of that, like you said, we can see the mental toll it took on kids and stuff like that because of what was going on. The behavior issues, man, it got crazy. It's right, right when everybody started coming back into school, we could really tell that there was a lot of things. And there, as a teacher, it was really kind of hard. There was nothing telling us really how to manage it because this was so new, and there was something that we had never dealt with before. So being able for you to identify that and then decide, okay, there's something that we can do to try to build something to help guide our youth to, get through this stuff. I think that's awesome. And this program, I'm looking at it and I was kind of reading through it a little bit, and we'll go a little bit more detail about how some of the stuff you do in your training. But it's amazing, and I'm glad that someone like you is out there who is trying to um, bring light to the mental aspect of the game, because it's such a crucial point about coaching that I think doesn't get coached up enough. Just because I don't think coaches don't realize it, but I think sometimes it's one of those things that, me being when I was like, oh, just toughen up. There was like no real guidance. This is like, work through it. And then when you're a coach sitting there and you're listening to parents say the same thing, just, get through it, do you toughen up? And you're like, well, that's great, but how? And so,
Exactly.
I think that's something that for me as a coach and stuff like that, and as a parent, that would be something to have that knowledge to be able to, I guess, like help your student athlete work through that stuff. Kelly, got anything to add to that?
I mean, yeah, pretty much said it all. Being a senior during that COVID time, I mean, I'm still bugged by it to this day. I mean, it's mentally, it was like dreadful. And even afterwards, and I can't imagine all those athletes going back either, not knowing if you're going to have those sports, not knowing how it's going to be when you go back to school. I mean, it was a rough time, and that I can't say much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Kelly, because what was
So Liz, I
taken
do want to.
from you and from so many is a big deal.
Yeah, it was rough. I mean, all of us athletes, we were doing really great that year. Yeah, I can't imagine how others felt too. So, I mean, knowing how dreadful we were, how I can't say it, how much of an impact it hit us seniors, I can't imagine how it hit the others either. Because I mean, it was rough. But yeah.
So real quick, Liz, before we move on, I do kind of want to talk. A lot of times I talk to my guests. Want to talk about how they got into sports and how that background in their sports and growing up themselves, how that built who you are today. So, let's talk a little bit about when you started playing sports, how, what age were you introduced and stuff like that, and what kind of influences you had growing up with parents or other adult figures.
Honestly, don't remember a time when I wasn't playing sports. I mean, I was the kid that was on like the little neighborhood swim team when you could like throw a kid in the pool and they could start swimming, and, they'll use soccer. And my dad tried to throw me into youth golf because he thought that would be great, but that was, I mean, I didn't love that, but I played it. I think I did every sport like that you can think of when I was a little kid. And then as I rode horses, I mean, I kind of did it all. As I got older, I really narrowed into basketball, volleyball, and track. Although, if I'm being honest, I ran track to stay in shape for basketball and volleyball, but it was still an, 3-sport athlete. Basketball was definitely my love. I mean, if you right now put on a basketball game and we sat here and watched it, I'd be fine. I can watch any basketball, any sport, any level, girls, guys, it doesn't matter. I love the sport. And so I would say basketball has always been my thing. I played it in Europe on a junior Olympic team, and I had opportunities to play at the college level, but I know I'm going to age myself here, but it was before there was a WNBA, and I really wanted to get into medicine at the time, and it didn't make sense to me. Is that like, do I take like I needed to lock in on what I needed to do in college. And again, I was going to U of M and tough school. So I wanted to make sure that I could focus in, because there wasn't an opportunity for women to move on beyond playing in Europe at that point in time. So I did not play at the college level, but it has been a part of me all the way through. I'm still active. I was in the gym. I do HIIT workouts in the morning. I play pickleball. I do different things now, even as an adult. I don't play much basketball anymore because I don't know, now things like get injured and don't heal very quickly at this age for some reason, but I still love sports.
Yep.
I think I have learned more from sports, I would say, than just about anything else. I think they teach you so much between discipline and teamwork, like how to push through when things are hard, how to heal relationships that might be, fractured because of something that happened in a game. Taught me a lot about confidence, a lot about speaking up for myself. So I would say that a lot of the skills that I have that have allowed me to be successful in life, I could probably trace almost all of them back to it being on some sports team at some point in time.
I 100% agree with that. They learned so much from sports.
Yeah.
Just today, I mean, like working in different environments, even if you don't like a person, you learn to work with them. I mean, that's how I learned it in sports as well, and how you learn how to be discipline yourself. And yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, teamwork is always, I think, something that people just kind of think, well, it's, teamwork, that's a kind of gets, I don't think it's underestimated, that term, because I think that it's important to understand that when you can work, when sports is kind of nice because you are working towards one goal, but everybody has different personalities coming into this. And what's unique though, when like, especially difference between high school and college is that in high school, you have common ground from the community you live at. When you get to college, everybody's coming from different backgrounds and it's a different, and so you learn, especially when you go to college, you learn how people, where they come from and their culture and stuff like that. And then, all that gets mashed in there too. So it's a little bit different at college when you're playing in college. And I'm sure, Liz, you've seen it too when you work with colleges and stuff like that. When you have coaches who have to deal with not just, players, but where they're coming from and their background and stuff, because everybody's coming from a different situation. They're coming from different towns. They're either coming from big cities, they're coming from small rural areas, and they bring their own, points of views and stuff like that. And you have to, learn how to coach that and to get them on the same page. So, sports they have such a great tool that, I think it's something that's, I think's important. And, people should try to be involved in, but, I know not everybody's in that boat, and that's fine. But I definitely think that's just an important part of it. So, Liz, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we're facing today as far as mental challenges. Let's talk about performance anxiety, the fear of failure. We know it's well documented, the issues that are happening right now in sports, youth sports, conflicts that are happening, parents' involvement, referee shortages, social media, all this stuff. A lot of this stuff, some of the stuff that me and you, I'm probably could speak between me and you, Liz, that we didn't have necessarily. We didn't have social media really to deal with versus now where that's such a big part of it. So let's talk about how your program approaches some of the stuff that we're going to talk about here. Let's talk about like performance anxiety and the fear of failure and stuff like that. What are some approaches that your program does to help athletes and not just athletes, but parents get through this anxiety and this fear of failure? Because parents, I think they think them personally that they fail if their kid doesn't do well, which is not true. But sometimes I think there's that perspective that parents watch their kids and they don't do something good. It's a reflection on them negatively, and it's not. But how do you guys go about informing parents, informing athletes about how to deal with challenges such as anxiety or failure?
Wow, there's so much there and such a crucial,
Right.
crucial topic. I think the biggest thing is, well, there's a lot of big things. So I would say the big part that I focus on with my athletes is looking at how they can push. Back in our day, we talked about this, or it was like, like toughen up, like handle it, just go hard, like just lock in, right? Like those are the things you got to want it more. Like it was always just kind of like, why is this an issue? And I'm not saying that was healthy back then either, but I think back in our age, that was more prevalent. And now we're seeing that all of these other pressures that our athletes have today that we did not have are really taking a toll on them. There's a lot of talk about like anxiety and being anxious. And, the kids that I work with, before I ever meet with them, I talk to their parents, and anxious comes up a lot. And the truth is that being anxious isn't bad. Like when we feel a level of anxiousness or fear or something like that, it drives us to do something. So I always use the example, if you're anxious about your test tomorrow, what do? Well, you study for it because that helps you realize that then you're prepared. And so the more prepared you feel for things, the less anxious you are. If you feel anxious because someone's walking towards you and you just have that bad vibe, you go across the street, you go into a store, you do something. So being anxious sometimes is a trigger to your brain that something needs to happen. That's very different than having anxiety that debilitates you. And people who have a true anxiety, they need support that is beyond something that I would do. But I differentiate that because I feel like the word anxious and anxiety get thrown around interchangeably. And truthfully, being anxious about something, not all the time, again, not debilitating, but is a good thing. It tells us what we need to be working on. So sometimes just naming that, people are like, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like we've missed that a little bit. It's become, everything that makes us anxious is bad, and that's not always the case. So a lot of times, if you can just even name that and talk about, well, let's talk about what it is that's making you feel anxious, and then let's talk through what you need to do to relieve that anxiety that you're feeling. It's sometimes just as easy as that for a lot of people, is being able to name it. One of the things that I see all the time, when we play with that fear of what if I make a mistake? What if I mess up? What if, all of the what ifs? And like you said, social media is watching. There's coaches watching at almost all times. These kids are on 10,000 different travel teams, AAU teams, club teams, all of these other areas where the scrutiny is even higher. And so how do you help them move past that and still play free? Because I try to remind them, like, it is still, like, until you get to college, it's still supposed to be fun. And I'm not saying it's not supposed to be fun at college, but when you're in college, it's a job. But when you're still in high school and club, like, it's supposed to still be, you're supposed to still have some fun here. So one of the things I talk about all the time with my athletes is that there are 5 pillars to being an elite athlete, and almost everyone focuses on just one of them. So everyone focuses on skill and technique and how to become better. So they all have personal trainers, and they all have, people that are helping them with their weight training and their speed and agility and all of these different things. But that's just one part of it. And we talk a lot about the fact that your nutrition is a huge part that a lot of, especially female athletes, are missing. Hydration, I can't tell you how often that's an issue, especially actually that's with male and female athletes. But then the last 2 are the 2 that I feel like are the most overlooked, and that's recovery. Nowadays, especially with the club teams, these kids are playing 7 days a week. They are working out with trainers in addition to their practice time. But the last one, and I think probably the most crucial, are the mental skills. If you are going to develop your physical skills, why are you not developing the mental skills? Because that's where teams fall apart. So that's a big piece for me, is I really work with them on how do you develop those mental strengths to really push through when you're in your head, because your body knows what to do. I mean, if you've trained, your body knows what to do. So how do you push through when you're mentally starting to spiral? And that's a big piece of what I work on with my athletes.
So let's go into that a little bit. Basketball, you get in slumps. They're sports that there's certain all sports you get in certain slumps in, but particularly with stuff like baseball, softball, basketball, where you're out the foul line and you're, for some reason, shots aren't going in during the game, or in baseball or softball, for some reason you're not making contact with the ball, and so it goes with everybody. They get in their heads like, it's that approach. How they approaching when things aren't going right? And to me, that's where I think coaches and parents can come in to try to help them get over that block. So one thing that as a coach and stuff like that, that I've always tried to do is that how you're talking to yourself. So it's that, man, I hope I don't go up there and strike out, versus I'm going to go up there and I'm going to get a hit. How are you approaching it when you're coming up to the plate? So for you, what are some of the things that you try to train athletes in the mental part to try to get over these funks where they're struggling at whatever sport they're doing, whether it's not hitting the ball, shots aren't going in, they just seem like they can't find that success at that moment? What are some ways that you can help with that?
Well, first of all, I love that you're coaching your athletes as to how they speak to themselves. I'm looking one of my sticky notes, like I have 4 of them up in front of my computer right now, and one of them is about how you talk to yourself, because that is crucial. The things that we say to ourselves, we have to talk to ourselves rather than listening to ourselves, because oftentimes there's things in your mind that are negative. And if instead you're filling that with things that you're telling yourself. But as a coach, the power you have It's interesting you brought that up, that you said that this past weekend, the Michigan High School Athletic Association, which runs every single sport that takes place in high school sports in the state of Michigan. So it doesn't matter if you're private school, public school, charter school, every single athletic event falls under that. They have this incredible Women in Sports Leadership Conference, and I had the privilege to be able to be a speaker this past weekend at it. And my session was on how to empower the mental toughness in your athletes. So while there were a lot of athletes that came, it was geared to the coaches and the athletic directors, because we're the link. Like everything starts with leadership. We can train the girls one-on-one, but I think for every one girl that I'm working with, if I can work with a coach who's impacting an entire team, or an athletic director that's impacting an entire program, I mean, as more leadership have these skills, it's huge. And one of them is reframing the way you say something. So instead of saying, hey, don't hit the ball into the net, or don't swing. I'm not a big baseball person, but like, don't swing when it's not in the strike zone, or whatever it is.
Right.
When you tell them what not to do, your brain is sitting there thinking, I'm not supposed to do that. I can't do that. I can't do that. So now your brain is so locked in on what you're not supposed to do that it then is focused on that. And I had this incredible woman come up and talk to me afterwards, and she shared a story, a study that I have not taken time to find this yet, but she said they interviewed all of these people who were survivors of car accidents where somebody hit a tree, and they asked them, what was the last thing that you remember thinking? And they all said, I can't hit the tree. Don't hit the tree. I don't want to hit the tree. And they all hit the tree. There's something about this. When we focus on something, what we're not supposed to do, that's what our brain is focused on. So if instead you can give it an activity to focus on, like focus on the ball, focus on this, or think about that. If it's in volleyball, instead of don't hit into the net, if you say, okay, elbow in deep corner, like when you're telling them what you want to focus on as opposed to what you're supposed to not do, that's huge. A couple of other things I think that are crucial. I think every athlete needs to have a reset routine. And the one I do, like, it's my next play. I always think of Coach K, but that whole next play philosophy, but it always starts with a breath. And the breath can be, just a simple deep breath in or deep breath out, but it can also be like a deep breath in and a short breath out, like some type of breath. But that breath actually like resets and regulates your nervous system. The next thing is a word. So maybe it's next play, or I've got this, or, calm, or whatever word like resonates with you. And then the last one is a physical anchor. So some physical activity that you do. So a clapping of a hand, a stomping of a foot, snapping a finger, snapping a wristband. It can be anything. I have a really elite soccer player that I work with right now, and she does a deep breath in and a quick breath out. And then she tells herself, you got this. And then she has like 2 quick hops that she does. So the whole thing takes place in less than 2 seconds. But for her and for the other athletes I've worked with, having something to do after a mistake to reset is huge, because you have the breath that regulates. It's kind of like restarting your nervous system. It's like turn off your computer and turn it back on. The word, where you're telling yourself what you're going to do, and then the physical actions it acts as like almost like that stopping point. So now you move forward. But the key is you can't wait until the game to do it. So that's where coaches come in. So if it's something that you create those game situations, like, okay, it's, a serve for the win, or penalty kicks, or free throw for the win. And they have to do that in a game situation in practice, where they're practicing these resets, calming their bodies, regulating their breathing, all of those things. It becomes routine for them. So then when they're in the big stadium with all of the noise and everything else, they can block some of that out, because their body thinks, okay, I've done this and I know what I'm doing here. So those are 2 strategies, but I have lots. Visualization's
Yeah.
huge.
And
There's a lot of them.
yeah. And I remember, so one of them I remember when I was coaching with softball, the head softball coach, he was big on mental training. And Kelly's shaking her head. So yeah, she knows. But there was one exercise they did, because I think in situations, especially as the games go on, when it starts getting towards the end of the game, you got to make your free throw, it's the final set of the service, or in volleyball or whatever. It's that situation changes as far as how we think about it, because I got to make the shot to win the game. I got to make the serve to set my team up to win. I got to get the hit to get on base, whatever the situation is, 2 outs, bottom of the inning, whatever the situation is. One exercise I remember, Coach Patterson talking about was you take a board, like a 4x4 board or a long piece of board or something that you could walk on. And then you would have the kids walk across it while it's on the floor. So you do this in the gym or wherever, and they walk across it and they're like, okay. And then next they take that same board and they lift it and they put it up a little bit higher. And so then they have to get up and they got to walk across it. It's the same size board, same length and everything. It's just a little bit elevated off the ground. And then you elevate it even higher. Well, now it's higher up. You looking at this, it's like, man, I hope I don't fall, even though you haven't fallen or haven't walked off the board the entire time. So it's that training of getting them to understand that it's the basket hasn't moved. It hasn't got any higher. The rim hasn't shrunk. When you're serving in volleyball, it's the same distance. Nothing has changed. So the ones that you're talking about, it seems like breathing, having a key word, having some kind of physical movement of some sort, like you said, stomp your feet, clap your hands. Those are very valuable. And things that I've noticed before, especially in youth and stuff like that, and teams that, and this happens with everybody. And I noticed that I went and watched some of my students, their volleyball game in middle school, and they were good. They were decent, and they were playing a really good team. It was a private school that a lot of these girls play on a travel team. So they hadn't lost all year, but they were being competitive and and I thought our girls were doing really well. But then they had that moment where one mistake happened, then a second mistake happened, and then everything started snowballing. And you can look at their body language and you can say like, oh, something ain't right. and then they kind of snowballs from one mistake into 10. So when that happens, and you talked about using those cues, like when you miss something as an individual, that's awesome. But how do you work that with a team necessarily? I mean, okay, individually, you've made a mistake. How do you and take that and expand that to the team to make them understand that, to get that teammate to, it's okay, you made that mistake, bringing in that positive support. So, they can overcome that slump, because it happens. It happens in games. It seems like one mistake turns into three, and I know in baseball and softball, it's like one overthrow can turn into three overthrows, because we always talk about in baseball and softball, don't chase the runner. And so what happens is, a throw to first base, overthrow, then the right fielder picks it up, tries to throw them out a second, and they overthrow it a second. And the next time that person's going around scoring. And so you're like, okay, they made like 4 mistakes. So,
And then as a coach, now that I'm like a coach, I'm like, just stop it.
Me and Kelly, Kelly got to coach, just real quick, Kelly got to coach softball this year for youth. We were what, 11, 12-year-olds?
Yeah, around that age.
It was rec league. And then she asked me to come coach with her. So, she was the head coach. As a father, it was really cool just to sit back and get to watch her do her thing. But you see so you have the snowball effect that's happening. What are some exercises? Just like we have during practice, and you're working on those skills to be better as a shooter, server, whatever it is, how in practice can you incorporate the mental aspect into that for practices and stuff like that, so you can build on that? So when those game situations come up, what are some training that you could do as a coach to help with that mental aspect during practice?
Great question. So the first thing that I think about is the fact that the mistakes really aren't the issue. Like you said, it's what happens after the mistakes that are the issue. I was watching the men's Michigan State basketball game was that last weekend? And I don't know, I think State had 10 turnovers in the first half, and it was halftime. And like, I went upstairs and I'm like, I'm gonna go do some work, because it was like, I mean, it was bad. Like, it was just, the game was, it was definitely not an even game. And I got a little work done, and I came back, walking in the second half. I'm like, what happened? It was like a tie game when I walked back in. And, that's Izzo. Like, he's going to get his team refocused. So even though they had a ton of turnovers, they came out in second half and, they played Michigan State basketball. I mean, they still lost, and that's fine. Like, that's not the point. The point is, they at one point went from having, they were, I don't know, down by 20 or whatever, to being up. So it's not the mistake, it's what you do after the mistake. Coach K at Duke, when he was at Duke, used to always say, next play, and like his team would chant it, next play, next play. And it's something about getting your team to focus on what comes next. So the personal piece is, if you've trained your athletes to have their own reset routines, then when they make a mistake, they reset. The problem is they don't always reset. Sometimes they shut down. And so as a coach, you want to have some type of a trigger that you can say to your athletes to help them realize they need to reset and move on to the next thing. One of the women in one of my sessions at the conference said her team will say, like, win Chad, or win Liz, or win Kelly. And the win stands for what's important next. I love that. I thought that was great. So they're just saying to the athlete, like, hey, forget about what happened. You're going to win the next play. I think that that's just such a powerful thing. I had a coach that I know well, who he's kind of this gruff, rough, tough guy. Athletes love him. He loves his athletes, but he definitely is like that. Like, and he would just say, it's done, do your job. And it didn't come across as like, I mean, it sounded harsh from like the stands, but anybody who knew him knew what he was doing is he was triggering his athlete. Like, that's done. Let it go. Now just do your job. His athletes respected him. He respected his athletes so much that he could say that and they would realize, okay, he means it. Like, he's not stressed about what just happened. I can't be stressed about what's happened. My teammates aren't. We're going to move forward. So I think that's really, really important to have certain things that you can do to trigger your athletes to realize that they need to reset. Because the flip of that is the coach who, when the kid screws up, slams the clipboard, sits down, makes like the whole, I call them coaching temper tantrums. And I have had them. I'm not judging. I've had them myself, but like those huge, like explosive moments, that message says to the team, wow, that kid just screwed up. Coach is ticked. Now I have to be careful, because if I mess up, now coach is going to be mad at me. And that starts that spiral of now people are playing either safe, or people aren't being aggressive, or people are in their head about what not to do as opposed to what to do. So how we respond, I always say, like, you can be kind of, I call it like I don't know, I was a very active coach. I was loud. I was that person, but not when it came to a mistake by an athlete. When it's an athlete's mistake, I need to take my deep breath. I need to calm myself, and I need to correct the mistake and then move on from it. Because if anyone can cause a spiral, and oftentimes it is the coach that does that. So I had to be very, very aware of that so that I didn't cause that to happen within my team. Because that spiral is the issue. The spiral is you make the mistake. When you make the mistake, it triggers that emotion for everyone. That emotion hits that self-talk, and that's what causes you to lose focus and spiral. So how do you stop that spiral before it destroys that player's focus and then your whole team's? So two different things.
So yeah, and you're right. And I, as a coach, I've been at fault of doing that. In the body, I've always talked about how important body language is, especially after you make a mistake. And I think for coaches, sometimes we don't hold ourselves accountable sometimes for that. And so we're frustrated because we're just as much invested in the game, and we want to be successful. And then so when there's a turnover, or something like that, or, a missed assignment on a play or whatever, you get frustrated. But, one coach that I was around, because I was always kind of, I wanted to be the rah, let's go, like that. And then over the years, I kind of dialed that down, not just because it wasn't, I wanted to be intense and, that type of coach. It was just, it's your players are looking at you when everything's going chaotic. They need to see that leader is calm during that storm. So, I started approaching it a little bit differently. Like, okay, it's okay. You made a mistake. It's okay. It's all right. We're going to be fine. Let's go ahead. And so when everybody else is all riled up and the parents are behind you and they're all mad because the ref missed a call or, whatever's going on, you got to be that calm for them. And I think that's important. So as far as that leadership role goes, it starts with the coach. And then if they can, like you said, with that coach, how they respected him, those players knew that, oh, okay, I got to get myself going here. I got to get ready for the next play. So, I like how you brought that up.
Robin Freilich, she's the head women's basketball coach at MSU. She was one of the speakers, like one of the keynotes last weekend. And she says to her team, do the next right thing right. So it's like that focus on doing the next right thing right. Like, so that's her that's her trigger to her team. Like, we're going to let that one go and we're going to do the next right thing right. And I think the key is having something as a coach that you say that is the trigger to your team. Okay, we need to reset and refocus. Coach isn't mad that that happened, so we need to move on. But again, it has to be something that you practice, that you are intentional about. And then again, sometimes you need individual triggers to certain athletes where you know what I need. I'm shutting down because of a bad play, and you're saying something directly to me to help trigger me to reset. So having those things, but again, they have to be practiced at practice. You know, if I said to you, if at one of your practices you receive however many ground balls to practice that skill, that, you know, that muscle memory of it, it's no different with those mental skills. They have to be practiced. It has to be something that's so routine that when it happens in a game, it feels like your body goes, oh, I know what I'm doing here, as opposed to, you know, I'm not sure what's happening. It's not during the game isn't the right time to learn a new skill like that.
Definitely. All right. So let's kind of talk a little bit about communication through conflict, adversity. We can talk about how we, let's see, I'm trying to think how I can say this. Goal strategies for athletes. Let's kind of talk about that a little bit. So the mental part of this, when we're trying to set goals for athletes, what are some ways that we can help them reach those goals as far as getting them mentally ready to help them block out that? So we talked about how they can, okay, next play, but when let's look at this from a parent's point of view. As a parent, how can parents help their kid with that mental part? We've always talked about, you know, being supportive. You know, as a parent, I've talked to other people and stuff like that. It's like, okay, definitely don't talk about the game, talk to your kid after the game about the game, because they're already going through that, unless they want to talk about it. I mean, if the kid wants to talk about it, let them, but you know, what are something parents can do to help with the mental aspect of this? Because I think parents sometimes unintentionally can put anxiety on their kids. And I see it a lot, at a game, and I'm seeing kids looking up at the stands at a parent, especially after they make a mistake. They're looking at their parents like, did I let them down? Or whatever. So as a parent, how can parents help understand what their kids are going through and what they can do to make it fun for the kids so that they're not worried about failure, I guess? What would be your advice in that aspect for parents?
Disclosure, this is one that I completely blew early. It's just my competitiveness or the coach in me that wanted to like fix everything, or the fact that I knew, like, I'm going to say with my oldest, like his goal was to go on and play college ball. So like there's it's a completely different world if your kid wants to play at the next level than if your kid just wants to play for, I'm not saying they don't want to be competitive, but that's not their goal. But early on, I was just, oh my gosh, like I'm actually embarrassed. And I'm only sharing it because I'm sure there are other parents out there that might be able to relate. But I was intense, and so was my husband. Again, we're both like pretty driven, very competitive home, but we would be loud in the stands and talk about the game afterwards and tell him things he should have improved. And I don't want to say like nitpick the coach, not always, sometimes have opinions about what the coach's call was or things like that, just too involved in it. And really what I learned is that my kids needed me to tell them, hey, like, I love watching you compete. Like, and I do. I love watching my kids compete. We need to encourage them and tell them the things that they do well. And then what I learned, especially with my oldest, because like I know the game of basketball. So what I would decide is out of every couple games, and it wasn't every game, but every couple games, I might see something where I thought, man, he's not doing this right. But how do I tell him without becoming that parent that I used to be that was in some ways damaging, like to my kid? So I started doing that. And again, I wouldn't do it every game, but after the game, after we've eaten, after everyone has calmed down, one-on-one, not where anybody else can like chip in, where it was just, I would say like, hey, here are the things I saw you do tonight that I thought were really incredible. I did notice one thing. Would you like to hear it? And I left it at that. Like I let it be still in the air. And you know what? Because he wanted to be the best, he would always say, yeah. And I realized I had two sentences. Like I could not go into a long huge, drawn out like this. I could give him 2 sentences. I noticed when the ball got reversed up the court, blah, 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 blah. Whatever it was. And that was it. And I found that it built actually a level of respect and trust because A, he knew I was coming from a place where I cared about him. B, I never did it in pressure moments where we were in the car ride home, where sometimes things were getting heated or where he was shutting down. It was always after the fact. And I thought that that was helpful. But again, I knew what I was talking about. When it came to football, like I've watched a lot of football. I've never played football. So with my youngest, I always just encouraged. Always just encouraged. Always told them that I loved watching him play. I would blow smoke, you know what I mean? Like if he didn't play well, I didn't go, "Oh yeah, I thought you played great today." I would say things like, "You know what? That was a great catch on that one pass," or "Wow, like that was a that was a tough call on that one thing." I might pick a couple things, but I didn't get critical because I didn't know the game enough. And I think that's one of the things I see a lot. There's a lot of parents out there who really don't know what they're talking about, chirping at their kids. And so I guess my key would
Mhm.
be A, if you don't know what you're talking about, like don't think because you've watched the game a lot that that makes you an expert. And B, focus on the support aspect. How to encourage, how to tell them, just keep telling them, "I love watching you play." My oldest, Chad, my oldest went from being a D1 basketball player to he's training to be a professional MMA fighter.
Wow,
I am
that's
so
cool.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is cool, and I'm proud of him. He trains about 11 hours a day. He is a machine, and he is so focused, and I
man,
am so proud of him, but it is hard to watch. Like MMA, I'm a basketball person. Like, it's hard to watch, but I
right.
will tell you what, after he's safe and fine, then I can tell him, like, wow, I still love watching you compete. I still love watching you do this. But my point is, even when it's hard, you still focus on the things that are positive and how to build up and encourage your kids. And then the other thing that I would point out is let your kids hear you bragging about them and not empty air bragging, but bragging about something specific. Bragging about not their play on the court, but like, wow, yeah, he was up at 6 a.m. this morning putting up shots for 3 hours, or he went out in the backyard with his dad to catch ground balls for whatever, whatever it is. But find that you're praising not the stats, that you're praising the process, that your kids hear you admiring how hard they're working as opposed to just always talking about the things that are like stat worthy. Does that make sense?
It totally, yeah, and it's the same thing I've told kids before is that, you know, especially in sports like basketball and stuff like that, it's like they think like they're gonna get better during the season, and then it's no, it's the work you do outside of that. And then me and another coach, we've always had this thing we'd say during football and stuff like that, and we always ask the kids, "When do you get better?" And then they kind of look at you and they're like, "Go and practice." I said, "No, when nobody's watching you. What are you doing outside of practice? How are you taking care of your body? How are you approaching your day? Are you going to go lift? Are you going to go study? What are you doing to make yourself a better athlete, a better person when nobody's watching you?" And when you bring that up about praising your kid doing the work that's not on the court, so when they're praising the work that they're doing when they're not in the spotlight, I think that's a huge and that's a big piece of advice for parents right there. I think that's amazing. That's a great take on how to be supportive of your kid. This is really cool because now leads us right into goal setting. So you talked about your son, in goal setting and how he's the work he's putting in for what he wants to do now with MMA. So athletes struggle with goal setting, and it's not just athletes. We do this with it's with kids in general, especially younger kids and students and stuff like that. They're always asking me in class, "Why do we have to do it? Why do we have to learn this? Why do we have to do this?" Because they don't see the bigger picture. They don't understand the steps that they're taking now, what they're going to lead them into the future. They're like, "Well, I'm never going to use this. I'm never going to have to solve, chemical equations and balance chemical equations. Why do I need to learn this?" And I try to explain to them, it's not that you're not going to use this, but it's your brain's learning how to solve problems. So many athletes struggle with goal setting. What are some things that athletes can do to help with goal setting? What are some things that they can work on to help them set their goals so they can try to find success in whatever they're trying to do?
Such an important question. I think there's a couple different pieces here. One, I think you have to be careful about setting goals for an entire season. one of the speakers talked about at the conference about that they focus on values and then the goals are short term. Like, so your values are here's who we're going to be this season. And then the goals are this game or this practice or this week, as opposed to, she talked about you don't want to like over or undersell your team with your goals, right? So like, do you want to say like, hey, we're going to be national champions? Is that like too far of a reach so it's not attainable? Or do you say like, no, we're going to be this and this year, and then you're like underselling? I did a workshop with a college team and I asked them, I said, I had everybody write out their personal goals and their team goals. And they went and stuck it on the wall and we walked over and read them. And what's interesting is it was a golf team, and golf is very different than the sports that I've played, in that like there's one best golfer on the team and then the second and the third. So if there's 7 athletes on the team, only 5 of them go to competitions, and let's say only 3 of them might compete in that tournament. And it varies by tournament, but for sake of this, but if you do really well this week and you knock out somebody else, you're now the next person up. So there's only one best on the team at the end. And then there's only one best team in the league, and then in that league, and so on up, right? So if everybody on the team wants to be the best on the team, then there's no way that everybody can meet their goal, right? So when I work with a lot of sports teams, the team, like the younger, the high school teams, I'll put on, the Journey song, Don't Stop Believing. I start just playing it and the kids all start singing along and I start laughing because I'm like, guys, this song is like, I don't know, from like the late 80s. Like this is like long before you were ever even thought about. And how do you know all the words? And they're like, oh my gosh, it's an epic song. Well, and I say to them, I'm like, do you know that this song, even though it's like 18 times multi-platinum, blah, 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 it never made it to number 1? And they're like, what? And I'm like, this song never made it to number 1. And I wish I had my stats in front of me, but it's like crazy. Like all of the awards it's won. I said, so is being number 1 the only like signal of success in a season? Like when you look back, all the other number 1 hits when that song was out, like most of you don't even remember. You've never, like nobody would have ever heard of in this generation, but being number 1 at the time didn't equate to where that got them. So when you talk about that journey and when you talk about what are your goals and where do you want to get, as opposed to always like, hey, we're going to be, district champs or state champs. Well, only one team can be the state champion, right? So what are other things that would be signals or signs of success for this team? And when you start really teasing away, what are the other things that would make us incredible? Yes, we all want to win. We all want to win. But what other things are signs that we have done a great job? And when you start teasing those away, that really starts to show people that it isn't just about, oh, every team wants to be state champs. Well, yeah, but only one team gets to be. So does that mean every other team that ever played failed? No. So let's start setting some other values and goals that are beyond just the winning, because then the winning is the byproduct of doing those other things well. And so, and again, you talked about focusing on the journey of where you're going, as opposed to always thinking, if I don't hit this top level, I was not successful.
Like it. Yeah. And it's the same thing, going back to teaching and stuff like that in school and stuff like that. It's, especially when you have a kid that's failing classes and stuff like that. And because they've either put stuff off or whatever, they're not turning in assignments, whatever the situation is, but all of a sudden that everything builds up and they feel overwhelmed. I think the same thing can happen with athletes if you, like you said, set such one big goal and not break it down into individual smaller sections, because it's those baby steps, right? So it's, what are we going to do in practice today? Me and a couple of the coaches I've worked with, we've always talked about, make yourself better today, so what are you doing? And then at the end of practice, when we kind of have a little debriefing, we kind of talk about, what are some positive things you saw in practice? What are some positive things you did in practice, or what did you see from your teammates that was positive? I think stuff like that really helps, because if you break things down into smaller pieces, eventually everything gets put together into what your ultimate goal was. So I like that approach, that how you explain that. Kelly?
I don't know if you've read Atomic Habits, but he talks about that. Like, think about 1% better every day. And if you go that 1% better, you're not saying exercise. I'm going to work out 7 days a week, 2 hours a day, this and that. No, I'm going to, like, you start with those little bite-sized moving forward and you build on that. And that's what leads to long-term success in anything.
Right.
I've been taking notes this whole time because I mean I'm not a parent to an athlete yet, so I wouldn't know much yet. But just to kind of get that information right now is kind of great. But also to kind of have this information for future coaching experiences because I was a very overthinker player all the time. So just kind of making these mental notes of like how to help my future athletes make themselves better mentally is kind of helpful. So I'm making notes right now on my phone.
Good. That's good. I'm glad. There's a reason why I wanted you on this one because I
Yeah.
think I thought this would be really good for you. I thought it'd be really good for your mom too because, she coaches too, but somebody's got to watch the kid.
But I'm a very mental person. I'm a very big overthinker. Like just from growing to the person I am now, I'm less of an overthinker and I kind of wish I was this person when I was an athlete. But yeah, now I'm just kind of hoping to brush this off onto my future athletes. So yeah.
Well, yeah, but Kelly, you've got so much going for you and so much ahead of you. Think, I talked
Thank you.
about I think about the mom that I was early on. I think about the teacher I was in the beginning, the coach that I was in the beginning. We all have things that we wish we could have done better early on. The key, in my opinion, is what
Yeah.
have you learned from it and how do you get better tomorrow? So I love that you're even saying that. I mean,
Right.
it means you're growing. And I think as long as we're always growing and getting better, then we're good.
100%.
So yeah, in talking about the goal setting and stuff like that, going back to youth in particular, just for anybody, everybody's always seeing the outcome or they're seeing the product on the court, and I don't think, and they don't understand all the work that goes in behind that. Kids, especially with social media now and stuff like that, and when you're watching ESPN and stuff like that, you're always seeing the highlights, right? You're seeing the person making the game-winning three-point shot or, making the game-winning touchdown, whatever the situation is. But you don't see behind the closed doors all of the stuff that those athletes are doing to get to where they're at. One of the stats I ever saw was with Michael Jordan. It was like it talked about all the shots he missed, all the shots that he took to get to where he was at. You know, talking about the games that you lose from. I think sometimes we as coaches or as athletes and stuff like that, we're always harder on ourselves on our losses, but your loss is sometimes your greatest teacher. And I think you learn more from losing sometimes than from winning. So setting goals and stuff like that and setting short term goals to build that 1% like we talked about, I think is crucial. Staying motivated when the process feels slow. I think sometimes with athletes, I think they feel that, it's like they can't see the outcome. And that goes with adults too. I think sometimes we don't see where this outcome's going to be. We talked about small increments and stuff like that. What is one technique or strategy you can use when you do get off track? So let's say an athlete misses or has a couple days off or whatever like that, and they're starting to lose focus of their goal. Is there any kind of mental training or anything like that that can help them get refocused? Liz, is there any way that you can help with that?
I think the key is just recognizing like every day is a new day, right? So, I mean, if you think of it in terms of, you think of all the people who are on weight loss journeys, exercise journey, like I'm always trying to be healthier and do better in that regard. And then like it'll be a really fun weekend and I will have eaten a whole lot of stuff that I shouldn't have and maybe not gotten to the gym. I can either Monday morning be like, okay, you never miss a Monday, like let's go. Or I can say, well, I've already blown it and there's 3 events this week, so maybe I'll start next week. And I've done both. Like I've definitely done the like, we'll start 2 weeks from Tuesday after all of these fun things because I know I'll have all these opportunities to eat great things and blah, blah, blah. Or I can say, you know what, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go work out tomorrow. And if I do eat bad tomorrow night because of that event, okay, then the next day I'm going to get back on. And it's something about that mentality of getting back on track as opposed to letting something slip far away. And that's a discipline. That is truly just like it isn't something. Some people are born with a stronger sense of that grit and grind, but other people, it's this discipline that you have to put into play in your mind where you say, this is something I'm going to do. And I love it. I heard somebody talking and they said, again, changing that wording like you talked about earlier, instead of saying like, I'm going to work out today, or I'm going to eat healthy, or I'm going to do this, like the things you're going to do. Instead, if you phrase it in terms of like, I'm a healthy person, or I'm an athlete, or I'm a, when you identify who you are as opposed to what it is you're going to do, then it's easier to say, if I say I'm a healthy person, then it's easy to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to get up and work out because I'm a healthy person. I'm not doing it because I want to lose 5 pounds or because I want to this or that. So when you start shifting and speaking about who you are, like how you see yourself, I think that's a key piece. I do want to go circle back to one other thing you were talking about, all the work that's done behind the scenes. A lot of times parents will say to me like, hey, I think my child has the potential to get to the next level, but I just don't know. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess the question is, does your child want it? Because if your child is doing all of these workouts and asking to meet with trainers and asking to do this and all of these things, then that's a great first step. But if you're saying, hey, it's time to get up, you need to go to the trainer, or hey, you need to get in, practice starts, you need before school swim, like you need to get into the pool, let's go, let's go. If it's always the parent pushing the child, I'm just going to tell you, they don't want to be at the next level. They might have the capability, they might be talented enough, they might be great at the next level, but if they're not the ones pushing it, then they're not going to be successful there. I mean, I've just watched it. I see the grind, and it isn't something that you can do if you don't want it. And so I think it's important that parents realize that if you're the one initiating everything, then that's a problem. One of the girls I work with right now, I have to actually tell her mom, you need to make her recover and rest, because this girl would go every day. My son right now, when I say he trains 11 hours a day, the only day he doesn't train is Sunday, and then he goes and runs sprints. Like, trying to get him to slow down is hard because he's so focused on what he wants. If I were the one saying, hey, have you worked out today? That would never, ever get him where he needs to be. Something to gauge, because a lot of parents will ask me, how do I know? How do I know if my kid can get to the next level? Well, it's really not about the talent. The talent is something you can work on. It's really about the mental part and whether they want it.
Yeah. And coaching is, as long as I have, in the kids that do go on to the next level, whether it's to college or some profession past that, it's all self-driven. And I see it a lot. You see it with parents that they have their kids in every single travel team / school thing, and it's like constantly going. And I've seen it with some of my students that,
Mhm.
that I got a basketball, because for some reason we have travel volleyball going around the same time basketball's going on. So, I talking to certain students and stuff, like, man, I got a basketball game today, here, at the high school, we're playing at this game. And then that's on a Friday night. And so your game's done at like at 9 o'clock at night, and then you're traveling home, and then you got to get up at 6 in the morning and travel to your volleyball game where you're to play 5 or 6 games that day. And so it's like constant, and it's like there's no recovery time. So even professional athletes have a recovery time. They have a downtime during the season. And I think that's one of the dangers that's coming up right now. I see with athletes, especially young athletes, there's no break. It's year round. And my suggestion for parents would be like, take a break. I mean, that doesn't mean not stop working and working on your goals, but take a road trip, go take a week, go on a vacation or something, do something outside of that, because I think a lot of times the burnout is what causes some of these kids to go, especially even with parents and stuff that are the ones that are pushing them. And some of these kids, they are self-driven. They wanted to go on to play at the next level, but still, it's knowing when it's okay. Okay, you have got to have that break, because your body has to recover. And we see these crazy injuries where there's no contact, and there's snapping ACLs or their Achilles or something like that. Something's happening when there's no contact or little contact. And it's kind of wondering how much is this because they're overworking their bodies. So do you have any suggestions for parents how to deal with that? Because it seems like with all the travel stuff going on, it seems like there's no break. It's like it's all go for 365 days.
Yeah, this is not going to make me popular, but I think a lot of the travel stuff is a money-making scheme by the clubs, and it bothers me. Not all of it, but a lot of it. They want to go year round. They're incredibly expensive. They send these kids to tournaments all over the place, and I guess what I would say is if your child is elite, then they need to be. I mean, my son played on the Nike circuit. Like, I mean, he like that's different than like some of the like house leagues, right? And I watched I'm gonna pick on soccer for a second, but I could do volleyball. I really could do any of them. But women's soccer, there are, let's say, 7 different leagues, and within that each league, there are 4 different teams. And unless you're in that top league in the top 2 teams, I'm not trying to be unkind, but all of the rest of these teams, you can be the best player in the team and everybody's like, "Oh, you're so great. You're so great. You're so great." Yeah, but you wouldn't even touch the field in one of those upper leagues. And I think what's criminal is all these parents who feel like my kid is the best. Oh my gosh, you should see them. They are just cleaning up on their club team. Well, yeah, but your club team isn't one of the elite teams. So if you're not in those top teams, you're really not getting a real strong grasp of how talented your child is compared to kids who are also equally talented. So I guess what I would say is being very careful, playing in more local teams, like, the ones where you're not spending and I'm listen, I spent every weekend for 5, 6 years in hotels across the country. I get it. I'm not saying I would change that for a second, but if I were doing all of that and then my son was really here when I thought he was here, that would have been a big issue. And so knowing where your child is and then gauging because of that. And then the other thing also not gonna be popular, I would say you get 1 sport a season. I walked into a gym. I watched one of my best friend's daughters play back. This was years ago. She was coming from travel soccer where she had games all morning. She's running into the gym, literally changing clothes as she ran into the gym, changed her shoes in the car to run to get to her bench for her basketball game. She still had her shin guards on. Like, never even like because it was just such this race. And you're right, those kids burn out. So I would say force in some opportunities for them to have downtime. But I can also tell you there are travel teams that if you miss a tournament, you're off the team. So to take a week off and say you need to go have a vacation, you need to figure out how that looks because there are teams that will absolutely negatively hold you accountable for that. So it's tricky. It's very tricky.
It is, and I just an example here locally. So one of my buddies, he coaches at a small school here, and one of the teams in the area, small town, they barely have enough to make a basketball team. They have like 6 or 7 girls on the roster, and it they forfeited all of their Thursday games for the season because there was 2 or 3 of those girls who played on a travel volleyball team, and so they just would forfeit. They basically told their coach, "We're not going to be here Thursday through the weekend, so don't plan on having us. We won't be there for the games." And so it's nuts. And as a coach that would be a basketball coach for that high school, I would be very upset, and I don't know how else I would do it. I would be like, I would probably say, okay, we're not going to have a team because this is ridiculous, because you are having to serve 2 different things during a season, and I think sometimes that's a disservice to both programs. So you're not giving your focus. I mean, I always wanted my daughter to do whatever she wanted and have opportunities to do whatever, but when it came down to the season, it's like, I want you to either play this sport or this sport. Give your focus here. That, you got a fall sport, a spring sport, a winter sport, whatever it is. And then you got your summer if you want to do something.
Well, even with other extracurricular activities, I mean, there was one time it was softball season, but I also wanted to do this play in Wendell, and I had to like figure out like how am I going to do this without burning myself out. So I finally was like, if I want to be able to commit to one thing, I need to commit to one thing. So I just dropped the one thing and went to another. So I I'm not the person who would want to like drain myself and not have my free time and recovery. It it always drives me insane that people always do 2 things at once and not be committed to one. Like, it always drove me nuts. I don't know why I did, but
Right.
it did.
It's interesting, Kelly,
Liz, any
because a
thoughts
lot
on
of
that?
the I was gonna say, like, a lot of the girls that I work with, that's the issue that they have is that they're involved in so many things and they want to do everything well, and it's almost impossible because, like you said, there's overlaps. You're going to burn out trying to do it. I know when my son was young, my husband watched this documentary. I think it's called like At All Costs or something. That was a basketball documentary that followed like the AAU athletes, and it was pretty. I mean, it talked about like how the shoe teams got involved. They talked about like if an athlete gets injured, you just are like gone. It was like talked about how they miss homecomings and dances and events and all of these big deal things. And my husband watched it and he's like, you need to watch this. And I watched that and I said, wow, I don't want that for my kid. Like that looks horrible. And so we made our son sit down and watch it. He was in middle school and he's like, yep, that's what I want. And I was like, did you just watch what I watched? Because that looked, I mean, that was harsh. And he's like, but he was like, yeah, no, that's what I want. But he had that drive, that focus. This is what he wants. And he was
Mhm.
willing to sacrifice a lot. And when you're looking to get to that next level, you are sacrificing a lot. But I think the problem is if you're really not looking to go to that next level, then do some of the things that are like be a kid, go to the school dances, go cheer at the football games, like do all of the other things. But again, it's like know thyself. Like your athlete needs to know what they want.
What the Joy mentoring program is and what you hope athletes, parents, coaches get out of this program.
Okay, so I started off when I left education doing just the one-on-one mentoring. And I think I told you I kind of rebranded from like just mentoring to like leadership and development because what I realized is that whether it's one-on-one and I'm doing like mental toughness or helping them become like just again the best versions of themselves, or whether I'm working with leadership teams or I'm coming in and they're bringing me in to work with a group of adults, like hey, all of these preseason, right? You have to, as a coach, all the coaches have to go to a meeting. So whether I'm working with the coaches on how to do these things, the key is how do we help our athletes be the best version of who they are? And that involves what the athletes need, what the coaches and athletic directors need, and then what the parents need. So my program, I've done keynotes, I've gone in and worked on different workshops and sessions, a lot of different incredible opportunities that I just feel so honored that I've been able to be a part of because I think every one of them makes a difference. My mission right now on these socials, the social media is a new thing for me, definitely taking me out of my comfort zone. But I had been challenged actually by one of the girls I work with. She's like, you need to do this. And I was like, yeah, it's not really my jam. And she's like, no, you really need to do this because other people need to hear this stuff. So my thought process behind doing the videos every day, and I try to do some for parents, some for coaches, and some for athletes, is if even one, like, I'm gonna do that whole starfish analogy, the little kid on the beach throwing starfish that they're on shore, throwing them back in, and somebody walks by and is like, how are you ever gonna make a difference for all of these? Like, there's no way. And he's like, well, I make a difference for this one. So it's kind of that idea in my mind, if I can help one athlete or one coach or one parent or one person look at things differently and help them to be able to help these athletes out there, then it's worth it to me. On my social media sites, I have all of these direct messages from coaches that are like, can you help me with this? Or how would I handle this? Or, oh my gosh, what you said here really helped me so much. It feels great to know that some of the knowledge that I have and some of the mistakes I've made and some of the things I've learned along the way, if I can share that with other people, that's sort of where I'm going right now with it. I still absolutely work with sports teams. I absolutely work with athletes. I do all of those things, but really I'm hoping just to get more material out there to help. Because I know, like when you started coaching, did anybody tell you anything other than like, here's the whistle, here's this? Don't put a kid in your car and make sure that you turn off the lights in the gym, right? Like, I mean, they tell you like 6 things, and
Right.
no one, fortunately, as educators, we know a little bit more about how to connect with kids, but really most coaches are really good X and O's people. They know their sport. They don't necessarily know youth, and they don't yet necessarily know how to empower and to build and to develop them into the people that we want them to become, but they're great at their sport. So I feel like we need to support more of those coaches out there. And then again, the parents.
How mental skills transfer live, I'm sorry. We've talked about how mental skills can help in the sports, and I think ultimately that can help in your life as well because you're always going to face conflict or you're going to have slumps in life. So I think those mental skills that you can learn in sports can also translate into your life and beyond sports. But what advice for young athletes would you give if you could just say one thing to a young athlete who's feeling overwhelmed and stuck? what was one piece of advice you would give that young athlete?
I think the first thing I would say is that their worth is not tied to their stats or their performance or their sport or anything else for that matter. Like you're more than your sport. And I have watched people get crushed because they get injured and they can no longer do their sport. And they're like, well, then who am I? And helping people realize that you are more than your sport. You are an amazing human being. You know, if you have faith, you know where you're created and you know who you are. So whatever it is that grounds you, knowing that you're more than the sport that you play. And as a result of that, that performance out there on that floor is, or court or field or pool or whatever, that's just one piece of who you are. And knowing that, hopefully you'll understand that a bad performance doesn't mean a bad person because that's not who you are. It's something that you do. It's just like if you have a bad day in the classroom, you don't come home and go, wow, I'm just a horrible person. No, you had a bad day as a teacher. It's the same thing. You know, we are more than the things we do. And so if an athlete or a young male or female can recognize that, so they stop looking at each individual thing that they're doing as their meter for their worth, because they're worth more than that. And all of these things are just part of the journey. If you said to me, hey, how many points did you score in this game? How many minutes did you get? All those things, like nobody remembers any of that. Like I couldn't even tell you my record. I can tell you a couple key things that happened in my sport journey, but I can tell you the teamwork, the confidence, the communication, the leadership skills, the self-belief, the resilience, all of those things that I took away from being an athlete are making me who I am today and helping me continue to grow. But it's not about being perfect. It's not about any of those things. Just when you get stuck, recognize that that's where you are right this second, but you have all of this time ahead of you to move forward.
I love it. Kelly, anything you want to add before we move on?
No, I'm good.
Still taking notes over there?
Yeah, mental notes, everything. I'm like imagining in my mind what I'm gonna do next season. So I'm just like, just what I'm doing over here.
There you go. There's
So Kelly,
your
feel free to reach out if you have any ideas that you want to work through. I'd be happy to work them through with you.
Awesome. Okay, sounds great.
cool. All right, we're gonna move on to our next segment. So this is a tradition on the show. I always do this. You get to be a part of it, Liz. I do unusual school athlete or mascots. So every episode, I do an unusual mascots from different schools from around the country. Locally around here, we talk about the Orofino Maniacs. I've talked about the Yuma Criminals. I've talked about what are some other ones I've done? I've done the Lava Bears in Bend, Oregon, and the Def Leopards. Believe it or not, there's a school called Leopards. That is it Arkansas? I think it was in Arkansas, and it was Arkansas. The school, the Deaf and Blind School, state school they have. Their mascot's the leopards. So they're the Def Leopards, and they actually had the band Def Leppard come to their school on one of their tours. They actually stopped by the school and got a picture with the students at the school. So I thought that was pretty cool. So this week's mascot of the week takes us to Lenox, Massachusetts. So what we got going on here is that this school has about 430 to 450 students. It covers middle through high school, 6 through 12. This nickname came about from a local newspaper back in the 40s, where this was at the gilded age of massive summer cottages. So these big full-blown mansions were being built in this area, in this town. And this became a resort town for the ultra wealthy, that these people would come over, and it would be a place to come in the summer, throw these big parties, basically treat it like their own personal vacation playground. So the school's mascot is the Millionaires. You have the Lenox High School Millionaires. So a little bit about the town. Lenox is a small town, about 5,000 people. Its economy is obviously tourism, arts, hospitality, service jobs, restaurants, hotels. Median household income is around 106,000. Home values are start around 466,000. So yeah, that's our mascot of the week, the Lenox Millionaires. Well, we got our own. We got Sun Valley. So I guess we got our own around here. And I'm sure every state has its own resort town. So whatever that might be.
Next week.
Oh, okay. All right. Ooh, kind of curious about that one. Local. Okay. So that's it. A couple things I do want to talk about real quick. I you can't see it, but I am wearing my Savannah Bananas shirt. Tickets went on sale. Got my tickets for the Savannah Bananas. Liz, I don't know if you've ever got experience with Savannah the Bananas, but if you ever get a chance, go watch that. Talk about if you want to watch something that's fun and that's like an amazing experience, go watch a Bananas game. So they're going to be in Boise. Got my tickets. I am working on something. I might be giving away 2 tickets. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to do it on the show or if I'm going to do it for the charity. So Colston Loveland has the golf charity coming up on May 2nd because his thing's for Idaho Special Olympics. So the proceeds are going to go to Special Olympics, Idaho. And so I am anyways, so they have teams already. Unfortunately, the teams are all full for that charity event here. But they are still looking for donations. They are going to have a luncheon. So even if you can't go golf, you can go at least to the luncheon. So I'm still I'm talking to Colston's mom about possibly getting tickets to them so they can use them as part of their fundraising. So we're still working on that. So go Savannah Bananas. You got Michigan basketball going on right now. All right. Got that going on. So yeah, Liz, I want to thank you for coming on. I appreciate everything you've done. Anything you want to say? A last word before we go?
No, I'm just so thankful to have been a part of this today. So thank you for inviting me on, Jeb. And nice to meet you, Kelly.
Hey,
Yeah, nice to meet you.
all right, I appreciate it. So thanks everybody for listening to the episode. I want to thank my fans in Finland. Apparently I got fans in Finland because they're constantly listening. So Helsinki, I guess so. This goes out to you guys. So I appreciate you guys. Thanks.